AskReddit by Ock1B. Reddit, what's your favorite podcast? Dan Carlin's Hardcore History, all other podcasts look at this works ye mighty in despair. His 100-year anniversary of WW1 Deep Dive is still one of my favorites of all time. Darknet Diaries. If cybersecurity or tech in general interest you, please give this a listen. Hell yes, this is a fascinating series. Once I found it, I proceeded to binge every damn episode available. Also, our Darknet Juries. The Adventure Zone. It's a D&D podcast by the McElroy brothers and father. Sure, there's been some good and bad seasons, but overall I do enjoy it. I'm currently listening to Balance for around the 15th time. After that I'm going to listen to Athersia for around the 5th time, then probably Amnesty for a 3rd time. I'm loving the anything goes say yes improv nature of Adventure Zone vs Dracula, but the piano music through most of it is a little much for me. Stuff you should know. Josh and Chuck have unreal chemistry. They've been in the game for so long, so consistently, and are just such a staple that I figure they're just assumed to be on any of these top podcast lists by default. I love those guys. This is important. TI National, where you at? Yes, points. Reply All now defunct, but they did great investigations mostly centered around internet mysteries. Case of the Missing Hit is an all-time episode. The Dollop, one guy who knows history pretty well explains stories to a guy that doesn't know it at all. Ronald Reagan with Patton is my favorite episode. Not another D&D podcast, a slightly sillier than average D&D pod. The Mavris Chronicles is a short side quest that is basically The Hangover on spring break with fantasy frat bros. The Dollop is amazing. Should probably be noted the hosts are comedians and they just rip the stories to shreds. So many episodes could be considered all-timers. Competitive Tickling, Ep 3, was my first. The Willie D is a great starter because it's short and sweet. The New York to Paris car race is probably my favorite live one. But seriously, an endless supply of great ones. Matt and Shane's Secret Podcast. Hell yeah. History of Rome. And Revolutions. After thinking about it for a bit, I think mine is Revolutions, at least for the non-NBA podcast division. You know a history podcast is good when you re-listen to it despite already knowing what happens. Radio Lab. Arlo G's. Science vs. 3 regulars in my podcast app. Love me some popular science. No such thing as a fish is hilarious and informative. It's 4 headline facts researched by some of the team who write Key. Their relationships are what really make the show pop. The Glass Cannon Podcast. It's an actual play Pathfinder podcast that is absolutely hilarious. Only actual play I can listen to, and I've listened to almost everything they've put out across the network. Their Delta Green show, Get in the Trunk, inspired me to run the system and my players are having a blast. 60 songs that explain the 90s. Dude is masterful. I'm on episode 65 and glad he didn't stop at 60. Last podcast on the left, it's legit one of my favorite things on the planet. Are they hilarious, yet you can tell they do their research on the topics they talk about. Doughboys. No peeking. Stuff you should know. How did this get made? What's up jerks exclamation point. Crime Junkies. Small Town Murder. True Crime Garage. Love STM. Been listening to them since number 1. Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend. True Sunlight. The Office Ladies. I'll carpool with a buddy of mine for work and he introduced me to the Conan podcast. Such a great listen for those long car rides. 1. Freakonomics Radio, the Ezra Klein Show. You are not so smart, 99% invisible, enthralling, stuff you should know, the unbiased science podcast. Bad Friends. Everything puzzle in a thunderstorm does. Scathing, Gam, Skepticrad et al. Hell yeah. Piat podcast are my favorites. Worlds Beyond Number, The Wizard, The Witch, and The Wild One. Nadpod, not another D&AMP, D podcast. Both are Dungeons and Dragons podcasts, and they are wildly different from each other. WBN is inspired by Studio Ghibli and is a slow burn, and Nadpod is mostly comedy interspersed with dramatic moments at bigger plot points. Edit, also Blowback, it's in its 4th season. S1 is about the Iraq War, S2 Cuba, S3 Korean War, and S4 Afghanistan. It's about the foreign policy leading up to and subsequent blowback of these major conflicts. The Rest is History is also a good one. Need a new podcast app though. Google Podcast app is gone now. Surprised to not find How Did This Get Made on here. A comedy podcast about bad movies. I fell off that show when it seemed June never watched the movies and they couldn't really make fun of anything new since they're in the industry. Love Jason though he's the only funny one. Behind the Bastards. Knowledge Fight. Some more news. Critical Role.